Let's jump in and get going. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this month's Launch Awesome AMA. I'm Blake Thorne. I'm the head of content here at Launch Notes, and really excited to be joined today by Dan Chuparkoff. Dan's the group product manager at Google. I think I did okay on that pronunciation, Dan. I was in my head about it. Dan's the group PM at Google working on the Firebase products. He's also an alum of really exciting companies like Atlassian and McKinsey and Company. He's also a keynote speaker with more than 25 years of hands-on product management and technology transformation experience at organizations of all shapes and sizes. Today, Dan and I are going to talk about a really exciting topic, 10 things you think are true about your customers but aren't. And first, as a reminder, members of the Launch Awesome community get to hear about events like this first. Launch Awesome is our Slack community for product managers, product marketers to connect and learn from each other. We've got around 300 of the best in product and product marketing in there now. If you want to join, Steve's going to drop a link in the chat right now. We'd love to see you in there. And again, if you want to submit questions for this talk, go ahead and drop it in the Q&A widget on your screen. We'll get to all of them, or at least as many as we can, kind of toward the end of the chat here. So let's get into it. Dan, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks a lot for having me, Blake. Getting to talk about stuff like this. I love software. I've been working on software teams for a long time now, and I've been seeing teams evolve since when I started in the early 90s. And it's just, we've come to a really exciting place. And I think I've also been a little bit unique in that I've spent some time working in San Francisco at startups like Atlassian or Big Panda. And I've also spent a lot of my time in the Midwest, in Chicago, Detroit, working at more Midwest-based companies that are sometimes at a different point in their modernization of the way they work. And so having jumped back and forth from the coast to the middle a couple of times, some of these themes that we're going to talk about have emerged. And they've helped me build a closer connection to my customers as a software provider, because I've seen what it looks like on their side a little bit more deeply than sometimes people have when they're working in the Bay or the whole Pacific Northwest, right?
Yeah.
So we'll talk about some of that stuff today. But Blake, anything you wanted to add onto that?
No, I mean, I think it's a super exciting topic, and I've got some familiarity with that myself. I mean, I'm born and raised in Michigan here in the Midwest, and then went off and worked at, like yourself, worked at Atlassian, some exciting companies in the tech industry, worked out in San Francisco, now back in the Midwest doing the remote thing. And it is amazing, just like this disconnect and like we've kind of been talking about, like the chasm between people who are building software typically, especially at these like software vendor kind of very forward thinking young tech companies, and the actual customer. There can be such a disconnect. And I think as we dive into this topic, folks are going to realize this is what's behind a lot of what's slowing them down or gumming up their business in ways that they don't see yet. But it's really illuminating once you start to dive into this topic. So I'm super excited about it.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, me too. And I've observed the same things you just said. So most of us in the Launch Awesome community, and possibly some of you that join this call from outside that community, spend a lot of your time as product managers or product marketers or as founders of companies. And as people with those roles day to day, we spend a lot of time talking about the future. We spend a lot of time like imagining what we need to put on our roadmap for 2 years from now. And we spend a lot of time talking about the features that we've rolled out that our users will adopt, that will make their teams better in the future. Even if that future is only 3 weeks from now, it's still a future. And we spend so much time talking about the future that we sort of accumulate all of that stuff in our heads and forget what the present looks like on most teams. And so I'm glad Blake called that a chasm between, the super innovative, agile, modern, nimble teams in the world and the teams that are trying to get there but aren't all the way there yet. There's a phenomenal book called Crossing the Chasm. It's almost 30 years old now, but it's a really important book to help you understand the different kinds of teams in the world and how they're evolving, how they tackle risk mitigation, how they tackle change and things like that.
Yeah. No, great points. And I think, it's such an underrated skill to have empathy for these folks and to be able to, to walk a mile in their shoes or to see from their perspective. And one of the big factors powering this is if you're a software vendor, if your product is software, of course, you're going to be very software driven. And obviously, nearly every business today is software driven, but put yourself in your customer's shoes. That software may not be the product. It might be insurance or financial instruments or rubberized nylon gaskets for boat engines. Who knows what it is? And it's important to remember, like, a lot of the perspective that your customers in, even if they're the ones buying and using and implementing your software, they're in a business that the whole organization is geared toward driving value in a completely different way, in a way that's totally outside of shipping code. And that comes with myriad changes and cultural impacts. But it's important to sort of realize that when the shift is, hey, are we selling software? Or are we using software to sell something else? And if you haven't worked in a company like that, you could easily miss that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've spent a lot of time working on projects that were sort of on the edge of the maturity life cycle. Like when I worked at ASEAN, we were helping people in the world that weren't agile yet become agile. And when I worked at McKinsey, we were helping people in the world that weren't using data science or machine learning to start using those things. And when I'm at Google, I help people that want to make the shift to cloud, want to use more things like Kubernetes to automate their infrastructure. And on the Firebase team, helping people that are making mobile apps to make better mobile apps that are more performant for their users and all of that stuff. So I've been a product manager for a long time now. It's hard to even remember the date when we started using that term. But the whole time, I was always also helping the users of my software make a significant plateau jump, right? Starting to use, internet-based technologies and then starting to work on distributed teams. Right. So I've been helping teams make those jumps for a long time. And so some of the highlights are what I'm here to talk about today.
Yeah, well, let's dive in without further ado, because I think if we talk anymore, we're going to start stealing themes from your list here. I just know it. So yeah, I'll let you dive in. You've got your 10 things that you think you know about your customers but don't, and feel free to dive into this whatever way makes sense to you.
Awesome. Yeah, I will. So I try to make this list so all of you can just see it. We could probably do an AMA on every single one of these bullet points separately, but I did want to kind of run through quickly, talk about the kinds of things I see in the world so that you get a sense of what I think an average company looks like. So I'll start at the top. I think as Blake said earlier, working in software, especially working in modern SaaS, where for modern teams, we sort of have this image in our head that the customers that will use our software are teams like relatively small teams of less than, let's say, 250 people, maybe way less than that, maybe 25, right? We tend to think of teams that they're accountable, they make their own decisions, they're super smart. It was a competitive job market, we got the best of the best. That's not the world that most people live in, right? There are companies in the Chicago area, there's a company like Walgreens. They're great, they're trying to do awesome things, they're building their own software driven loyalty program, they have their own website and ordered functionality that they've made, but they're competing for talent with people like each of you on this call. And it's hard, right, to get the best of the best. And so sometimes those kinds of teams just start to develop different ways of working because of their organizational culture, because of the talent that they have, the amount of experience, and all of those things.
And I can't imagine, speaking of hiring, I can't imagine, especially if you're an organization like Walgreens trying to attract tech talent, when you're trying to hire software engineers, sysadmins, architects, whatever, who also have opportunities to work at exciting places like Google or Meta or Amazon or you name it, from FANG companies all the way to exciting startups. It's like, it's got to be really, really hard if you're, if you're a traditional company like that, bought in on technology to win that hiring game. I can't imagine the challenges there.
Yeah, it is really challenging. I worked with a company. We were doing some data analysis work for a large company that makes airplanes, whose names you probably guessed, but I won't tell you which one. And they were, for every 500 job offers that they gave out for software engineers, 499 of those people would decline the offer.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. So that's
Yeah.
it's a reality that some of your customers are juggling. And I don't want to drill on that too much, but we can talk more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the next thing that I get a lot is we've been talking about Agile for a long time, 21 years, and a lot of teams get that we should have Scrum and we should have boards to look at the work and we should have nimble check-ins and all of that stuff. And that was going along really, really, really great in most orgs until we also started to add OKRs to the pile. And so now people are trying to set quarterly OKRs. And so they're setting arbitrary deadlines that they pulled out of the sky to get random stuff done by the end of March because they made an OKR and promised their VP they'd get that done. And that's completely changing what it means to be agile. And so there are lots of people that are trying to reinvent, what Agile means for bigger organizations that manage risk in different ways, but that's created a lot of confusion in the world. And so if you're imagining that people plan their work in 2-week sprints and they have a, check-in every morning and they have a demo every other Friday, you're imagining something that may only apply to 10% of the teams out there. And we're a lot further off from that than I realized when I first started, exploring outwards from my time at Atlassian.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is it the case more that there are other frameworks or models that they're operating off of, or is it more each team picks their own sort of way of working?
I think it is a very unique snowflake kind of world where, right, what sort of happens is some boss somewhere says, what are you going to get done with these resources? And somebody else says, oh, we're going to try to get these things done. And then they frantically just try to get that work done. We'll jump ahead to number 6 for a second. A lot of teams are using a tool like Jira or Monday or Asana or Linear or whatever you want to pick to put all your work in a list and start working your way down through it. But still, if you look at the version 1 Agile State of Agile report every time it comes out, every time the leading tool for managing work is still Excel.
Yeah.
Right. People are just putting work. The good ones are putting work into Excel, and a lot of them aren't even doing that. They're just having, random meetings and talking about like what they're going to do next. And sometimes they're trying to predict when they'll get it done. And sometimes they're not even doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you take it for granted. I mean, especially if you're in a leaner or more sort of modern organization, like the switching cost or just like the implementation of bringing on another tool, like you think like, wow, what a headache to continue doing that in Excel. Like what you don't realize is what a headache, damn near impossible it could be to bring on a replacement for that or to bring in something else that you could do it in instead. So for, the general population in these teams, it's like, cool, we'll make this work in Excel. That's easier than, bringing on something else, Jira, whatever. Like, yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. I've seen that a lot. And what happens in Excel is interesting because people really like that they can make a copy of an Excel work list and then do whatever they want with that copy that no one gets to see until they're ready. And they can add a new column without being a Jira admin. And, all of those things about Excel make it frictionless. I don't want to drill into whether you use a different tool, but my point is a lot of people are not shifting to those modern work tools that we all sort of take for granted.
It's incredible. Not to make this the Excel hour. So this will be my point on this, but the last startup I was at was actually a workflow management and business process management tool. And we did a lot with helping customers modernize their workflows, and we get an inside look at their Excel, process workflows. And it's astounding some of the things that people have built out. And often they're as, I hate to say as complex as, software, but in a lot of ways, like they had a working running program that they'd built out over the years. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
there's a major, like, no, there's no price tag incentive that can, create that shift to another tool. In that case, it's like, you've got to do some major, you've got to do some major attraction to pull those folks off of that tool. It's a big job.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. 100% agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So I want to jump into cloud a little bit as well, because there's also sort of a foregone conclusion sometimes that people understand cloud is better, SaaS is better. It's low administration. It's, you can pick and choose. You can gradually deploy it a few people at a time. All those things are great, but also data storage and data residency and data access is becoming a more and more controversial thing in the world.
Sure.
Especially
Yeah.
if you start expanding outward into EMEA, talking about, what happens to data from a company in Germany, right? Where's that data stored?
Yeah.
Who has access to that data? Those kinds of things are hotly debated right now. And there are definitely things about cloud that everyone unanimously loves, and that's the marketplace of services attached to cloud data instances, right? If I get some, Google Cloud Storage, I also get Google Cloud Compute, and I can run processes on the fly and lots of other things. AWS and Microsoft Azure has this, same kind of advantage. People love all of that. They love the services available from the cloud providers. What they like a little bit less is not really knowing how much access people have to that data.
Yeah. Yeah.
Imagine for a second, I'm working at a consulting firm, and that consulting firm is doing a merger and acquisition due diligence, right? If that consulting team is using something like Slack, and they're talking about the details of that project, that data says really specific stuff about that merger and acquisition, right? That the public cannot know, and it's knowing is financially advantageous, right? And so it just can't be anywhere except on that consulting company servers.
Really. Yeah.
And that kind of stuff happens a lot. People take customer information and upload it into tickets. People talk in their chat program, or they send emails with attachments that have huge amounts of customer PII in them. All of that stuff happens way more frequently than you imagine, and that's making people switch back off of cloud sometimes as they try to do more stuff, as they try to serve government clients, or as they try to serve, like, I worked with Nike for a little while, and Nike is a global organization. They've got people all over the world. So your stuff has to work. International privacy laws, and that's some complexity.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, the best product managers and product thinkers I've worked with at least have empathy for this and make an effort to understand the sort of nuances of this challenge. It can be easy. I mean, especially if you're earlier in your career, or you haven't worked in an organization like this, it can be easy to be kind of flip about these concerns and sort of write them off as, oh, that's old fashioned. But, that's really just a recipe for misunderstanding your customer. And, an example I always give is, think of like your personal, like, banking data. How much tolerance do you have for security flaws? How much tolerance do you have for mismanagement or lost or improperly shared information when it comes to, like, your brokerage account or your savings account or something like that? It's like, it's literally that type of sensitivity that these organizations are dealing with. So yeah, it's important to have that empathy and to seek to understand those challenges rather than just write them off as, oh, this old-fashioned company needs to get with the times. It's more complex than that.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, like, sort of to jump ahead, okay, so let's assume all these things are true. What should we do about it? Recognize that your customers are going through these really serious, like, identity crises and migration efforts and like that, right? Help them build the case for their own leadership teams. Right? If you're trying to sell a SaaS product into your organization, like if you were trying to sell whatever, let's say Jake and the Launch Notes team is trying to sell me Launch Notes to bring inside of Google. I'm like, okay, Looks like a
Perfect.
cool tool. I would love to use it. It would
Sounds
solve
great.
clear points.
Yeah.
I need to make a presentation
Yeah.
to 50 leaders here at Google to gradually like syndicate that idea across
Yeah.
that. I need to help them understand why it's safe, why my data is going to be protected, how it really solves pain points, what the
Yeah.
market landscape looks like. And traditionally, I do all that work myself.
Hmm.
And the more a SaaS software provider or other service starts to help me do that work, right? Start to give me like a cell kit,
Yeah.
right? That will help me make these cases. Why is SaaS better than self-hosted, right?
Yeah.
What is the cost difference? What is the security difference? How big is your security team versus how big my security team is? Is your stuff
Yeah.
safer there, or is it safer here? Like those are the kinds of things that your customers are wondering sometimes as they try to make decisions. And so the more you put yourself in their shoes and help them become the hero inside of their organization, helping
Yeah.
them make sure that all 10 of these things become true at some point in the future, that will make you their hero because you made them the hero in their org.
100%. And I've seen it too many times at SaaS companies where they do have that first demo goes great and they find their their equivalent of Dan at Google, where it's like, we've got our champion, we gave him the demo, he loved it, he was excited, this is going to be so great. And then eventually things start to kind of get gummed up and the deal goes south and everyone's like, what the heck happened? Dan told us he loved the tool, we had our best AE give the demo, it was a lights out demo, we answered all their questions, we sent him all our materials, he said he loved it. Well, what happened was, behind the scenes, there were, like you said, there were those, now the onus was on you to give that presentation and put a deck together and expend professional capital in your organization to get time on a VP's calendar and to jockey some other priority out of the way for a potential new software that you haven't even seen value from yet. So yeah, the more folks can understand that and dive into that, I personally think you're not doing loss analysis interviews. That can be a great tool for something like this. Like, go back to some folks who were excited and let some time go by. Make it very clear that, hey, I'm not trying to sell to you again. I'm here to learn. Can I get 30 minutes to kind of do a post-mortem on this deal with you? What happened? You sounded excited. I totally get it. For whatever reason, it didn't work. You can start to pick up some of those patterns if you have enough of those conversations. It's a really, really important practice to dig into.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think, and the more you do that, the more you will help the next team be successful with less friction, with less time spent on their side, less money spent on their side.
Yeah.
Those people, the people that took their time to find you and the thing you offer, they're seeking out solutions in the world.
Yeah.
And those people are the kind of early adopters that you want. But there sometimes is only a small number of them inside of an organization that might be 85 years old, like literally. And changing an org that has 700 VPs that they've all been around for 15 or 25 years, like that's hard, and it takes effort.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think we could again talk about each of these bullets, but I'll jump to the bottom again for a second because I think that's an important one also. Earlier we were talking about, if you bring a new tool into an organization, it sometimes takes training. People don't know how to use it. I was just listening to somebody complain about how their org switched from using Slack for chat inside their org to using Teams inside their org instead. Both great tools. I love them both, and I don't really have a preference as to which. But this org took the thing that was working and swapped it out with the other thing that people were less familiar with. And sometimes take for granted how hard that is. Like how do you find the groups that you want to be in? How do you find your old messages? What does search look like? How long are messages there before they're archived? Like all of those things are things that every person will have. And I think organizations sometimes are putting that change tax on their people so often that their people are exhausted by it, and they're just done. They're just done learning, trying to learn the new thing that somebody else picked that wasn't them.
Yeah.
They don't have enough budget to go to a training thing. They're just
Mhm.
trying to bring it every day with the 15 different tools that they're trying to use to get their job done. And all of these things are things that will remove friction and pain from their job, but they get a different friction and pain. The friction of like needing to
Mhm.
learn anything, needing to figure out who to ask, needing to
Yep.
confess that they don't understand when they feel dumb, when it
Yeah.
should just be intuitive. Those are all some of the struggles in the employees of the customers that you're building for. So
A hundred,
those are
100%. Yeah, and it's a big, it's misunderstood how big of a hurdle that can be to get over. And if you're sort of analytically oriented, you might perceive the friction towards success with your product as like, well, it's kind of an 8.9 to get to that place where you're trained up and implemented and using it, it's great. But you're going to get to a 9.2, so it's a net balance gain. So what's the problem? It's like you need to be providing an order of magnitude more value to that person than the friction to get to that place. Like it needs to be
yeah,
a multiple of how hard it is to get set up, not a little iterative bump.
right.
Yeah.
So yeah. So thing number two is really overinvest in tutorials, walking people through problem solving, give an opportunity for your passionate users to make their own tutorials. Like give them a
Yeah.
marketplace of, right?
Yeah.
Because your evangelists are
Oh my God.
already selling your own tools inside of their org. Let them expand that stuff outward and sell for you and train for you, because that's
Yeah.
a really effective way to get the word out there on the common problems.
100%. I feel like I could do a series of talks just on this topic. This is so near and dear to me. But yeah, you're definitely touching on something super, super important here, which is give them the tools and content and education. And I especially think you think of the folks who are coming up in the modern workforce. If you're in your 20s, 30s, earlier in your career, maybe getting to mid-manager or director level and, organizations in some cases, you're dealing with some like very digitally native people. Like you're
Right.
dealing with people who have been on smartphones since high school or earlier. You're dealing with people who have been using consumer grade software tools most of their life and consuming like some very consumer grade content. Like think of, if you want to learn Photoshop on YouTube, there are fantastic tutorials that are colorful and engaging and informative. And there's a lot of there's a lot of this folks coming up in this environment that the B2B instruction manual that you're giving them is not gonna pass the test. It's gonna look like hieroglyphics to a lot of these people. Like you really need to come correct with, like you said, like providing those tutorials and best practices and content and empowering. If you can empower your users to do the same, like talk about a powerful, like the most powerful companies have that. It's
Right.
Salesforce, where their end users are then out there actively, creating content and materials and sessions and courses on how to be successful. Like that's the kind of dream scenario.
Yeah, exactly. And Stack Overflow is the
Yeah.
best
Yeah.
example of that, right? It's like
Yeah.
that you can find out how to do anything with anything in
Hmm.
Stack Overflow, and it's all user generated. Like that's incredible. And so
Yeah.
the more software teams leverage, Q&A,
Yeah.
things like that, and even incentivize it, like create
Yeah.
contests or badges
Yeah.
or something for your users to help people over those hurdles.
Yeah, 100%. So we've talked a lot about things to think about for folks, and we've peppered in some really great actionable tips throughout each one, I think. But as you kind of zoom out and look at this list, Dan, are there a couple kind of big picture things people can do or think about in order to not fall into these traps?
Yeah, first and foremost, the most important thing is recognizing that this
Hmm.
is true, right? Now, if you take your possible cohorts of potential customers and divide them into segments, right? You've got your early adopters at the top of that list, and they're probably going to respond to what you're already doing right now. But then figuring out who your next cohort of customers in the book Crossing the Chasm, they called those the
Hmm.
early majority. And
Hmm.
figuring out how to reach the early majority takes a different collection of stuff. They will be more focused on risk and cost. They'll be more focused on things like privacy. They'll be more focused on endorsements from other clients that are like them in size or industry. So figuring out how to, one, recognizing that this is the plan, and then just like you make feature roadmaps where you gradually build functionality, you've got to do that with your customer acquisition too, right? Figure out what is your marketing strategy for getting early adopters, and then what is your marketing strategy for reaching the early majority, and then what is your marketing strategy for reaching the late majority, and then maybe you throw out the laggards. Maybe you just accept that those people are still 20 years away from being ready for the change that you're trying to make in the world.
Yeah, yeah. Great point. Totally different motions and mind frames you need to have to be successful in each one. And you certainly can't copy and paste across all those different cohorts. That's a recipe for disaster.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And I think even earlier, even before you're trying to actually acquire those customers, when you're in the founder stages of life, when you're trying to get investors and you're trying to figure out what your market opportunity is, understanding this is also important at that phase, right? Because what you don't want is to have a process for reaching only the early adopters, but tell your VC you have a process for reaching like the total addressable market. Those two things will eventually smash into each other like I don't know,
Yeah.
like a car
Yeah.
crash, right?
Yeah. And totally different profiles of just conversation, person. I've seen it personally so many times where it's you're building something for kind of an early adopter. It's kind of the market's never seen this type tool. Like think of like Slack early days or something like
Yeah,
that, where it's like this is sort of a new innovation. This is you have to be a certain forward thinking kind of person to even want to kick the tires on this. And then that company gets in front of, yay, we've got the head of procurement at, Global
yeah,
Corp or whatever. Is like they want a demo. And it's like then you go to that demo and it's just kind of crickets because you don't have audience demo fit, right?
right,
You may
right,
think
right.
you have product market fit, but it's like you got to have a fit with those conversations. Well, great. I think Steve, who's behind the scenes, is gonna pop up some questions that we've been getting here in the community. This one, I'll just read through it and feel free to dive in, Dan. This is, what is a good cadence for talking to customers to have more empathy? Seems like there's a floor for what you think a reasonable cadence is. Is there a floor for a reasonable cadence? Yeah, that's a good question. How often do you need to be talking to customers?
Yeah, so as often as you can is definitely my answer. But I think there's a reality in resource and time management that also creates some challenges. I think when I'm talking to customers, I'm usually trying to do that in three separate ways. The first is just individual customers, either my best customers or lost customers that I'm trying to understand why we lost them, or potential customers for the future. And I try to talk to two of them a week. As a product manager, I want to reach out to 10 or 20 people from that I met somewhere on
Yeah.
LinkedIn, colleagues from other companies, or people that signed up for demos. I want to
Mhm.
try to schedule at least two conversations a week so I can understand people's needs, start to see some patterns. You'll see once you talk to enough customers, you'll start to see some patterns emerging, and
Yeah.
and that's important.
Yeah.
Not everyone has a customer list to do that. So you gradually get to the place where that's achievable, but
Yeah.
that's what I try to get to.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
the way I try to get to there is by going to conferences.
Okay.
I have the last 3 years, it's been a little conference dry. So that model of operating for myself has been a little bit challenging, but I try to go to 6 or 7 or 10 conferences a year.
Oh, cool.
And
Yeah.
I might not have the money for a booth, spending 40 grand or 80 grand for a booth is not always the reality for companies
Yeah.
earlier in their life, but there's still people at those conferences and you can
Yeah.
still talk to them even if you don't have a booth.
Yeah.
One of my favorite strategies from Atlassian is I would go to a conference and then I would just go to every single booth and ask them questions, because those are all
Oh,
SaaS
sure.
software companies. They're all
Sure.
my potential customers. If
Yeah.
you go to something like, AWS reInvent, there's
Mhm.
4,000 customers in that booth, right?
Yeah.
And they're stuck in the booth. They can't leave.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so do that often.
Yeah,
That's
those have been some of my favorite conversations at events like that. Is you kind of just, there's a lull in the action. Maybe everyone's in the keynote or something, and you can just kind of walk around and talk to the other vendors and sort of feel out, how's it going for you guys? Where are you from? What's your pitch? Tell us about yourselves.
yeah.
That's great. Yeah.
And I make a survey, right? An actual
Okay.
survey in Google Forms or whatever you use for surveys. And I
Sure.
carry it around on an iPad, and I ask every single
Cool.
person in every single booth 3 or 4 very specific questions. And then I leave with 1,000 people that answered my survey. And that's incredible.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah, that's very cool. My little trick from the last startup I was at, we did a conference and you've got the lead scanner badge scan thing, which can be a little clumsy. I actually printed out a QR code and made them stickers that was just a direct book to our sales and I think our founder's calendar. And I had everyone stick them on the back of their phone case. So then if you're talking to someone, it's like, hey, I'd love to book some time and talk more next week or something. It's like, great, give this a scan. Now you're on the calendar. So
that's awesome.
But
that's fantastic.
Yeah. Steve, any other questions we want to jump into here? We've got another one. Are there any persona frameworks or other tips you recommend to help keep things that you mentioned in mind in our day-to-day work? Yeah, good call. I mean, I've come across these, this is a framework for personas or how to build an ICP. And it's easy to get kind of lost and intimidated with like, gosh, am I doing this the right way?
Right. And I think the mistake a lot of teams make with personas is they're imagining all the companies sort of look like the one company archetype that they imagine. And so they're dividing personas up, and there's a director level persona person, and there's a engineer person and a marketing persona.
Yeah.
But they're not thinking about the difference between a director level person at a startup and a director level person at a 15,000 person organization, right? And so when you look at your potential customer cohorts, early adopters, early majority, late majority, you should have a persona for each of those cohorts, right? You should have the leader level, the decider person at a modern early adopter, and you should have the decider persona at the early majority and the decider persona at the late majority. You should have a matrix of personas and adopter types because they make decisions in very different ways.
That's excellent advice. And personally, I've always found it to be a good litmus test of how much you're talking to your customers and how close you are to your customers. If your team can actually reference some real customers in terms of framing these personas. So instead of, oh, we got SaaS Sally, like there's, Julie from some company and you kind of know like who she is, what she does, and she can kind of serve as an archetype for, and you have kind of conversations where it's like, would a Julie really care about this? Kind of that can work its way into the fabric of the company's kind of dialogue. Yeah. We've got one here from Matt. This is when it comes to helping a champion advocate for a product, what would you like to see startups do more to help their champions win over support? Are there any above and beyond tactics that you can call out as extremely helpful? Yeah, kind of what we were talking about, empowering your champion.
Yeah. So if you have ever worked at a place that had a fairly mature sales organization, each of the individual salespeople never makes their own sell presentation. There's always a shared sell presentation that's been made collectively by the whole group, and they all use the same one.
Yeah.
People add some custom things and they tweak it a little bit to match their voice, but
Yeah.
there is always a sell kit or a media kit.
Yeah.
And that is there to help the people that are evangelizing your product win over their audience. Your customers need that same thing. And so
Yeah.
making something that helps explain why you're better, how it compares to the competitors, what the pain points are, what is the ROI over time, what is the privacy concerns, like answer all the questions for them. Like when I go into my VP's office or their virtual meeting, I need to give them a presentation that explains why Launch Notes or why Slack or why Jira is a great idea. And they're going to give me questions and I'm going to have to answer them. I'm going to be tap dancing a little. The more you can pre-answer those questions, the slide deck, literally make the slide deck that person can give to their boss, will get you pretty far.
That's absolutely, the best advice for this. And if I could all I would add to that is, and it's just like we were talking about with your customer persona, go out and ask. Like, don't guess at this. Like the best sales leaders and revenue and marketing leaders I've seen do this will actively be talking to that champion and say like, okay, like what's the profile of other people we need to buy in? Like, oh, okay, Dan's your manager. What's Dan going to care about? Like what's going to be the most important thing for Dan? Okay, great. We'll get this and this and that together. Like what do you think he's, who else needs to look at this? Like how much time do they have? Like that person, if they truly are a champion and bought in, like they want to not have wasted their time. They want the process to move forward, and they will often be very forthcoming and extremely helpful in terms of getting these materials together and giving you the intel you need to get the right stuff together. It's just a matter of asking and kind of bringing them into the fold for that. Like, don't do it alone. Don't guess.
Right. Yeah. 100% agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sure I could talk about these topics all day. Unfortunately, we're a little over time, but thank you to everyone who watched live and submitted questions. We'll be sending you all a recording of this afterward too. And Dan, thanks so much for being here. Immensely valuable for us and our community. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. It was my pleasure. I could also talk about this stuff all day. I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn or wherever. I'm really one of the only Chuparkoffs on the internet. And so feel free to connect with me. I'm in the Launch Awesome Slack community. So join that. Let's have more conversations about all these things. I love talking about it.
Yeah, amazing. Love to hear that. And we'll definitely take you up on that. We'll do a part 2 in the future here because there's plenty more to talk about. So thanks again, Dan.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.
All right. Sounds good. Take care, everyone. Bye. Thanks for coming.
Bye, all.